Hello everybody, my name is Danny, and today we're going to do the political commentary of the month. Now, there was about a roughly 5 days to a week period where I was sincerely considering moving all of my political commentaries of the month over strictly to Rumble and to Odyssey, because I recently had to, did create accounts over there at the YouTube alternatives, because our overlords here at Alphabet, aka Google, aka YouTube, of course, only know what's best for us. Just the best of us. Best for us, yes. And, that includes words, and information, and resources, and sources, and data, and statistics, and literally everything else. You know, they have the official list that's best for all of us living beings on this earth, of course. And any other thing that doesn't agree with that list, of course, is evil and bad and deserves a guideline strike. Which, of course, is what happened to me. That's also why I was suddenly gone. Like 2 weeks ago. Or 2 weeks, 1 week. I fucked up. Anyway. There you go. So, I was gone for a week because I got suspended for a week because I've been a bad, bad boy. I've been such an evil man. I've been such a devilish individual that's been spreading such devious misinformation, so critically misinformed that, you know, of course, naturally, it's caused potentially egregious harm onto you in your face if you had seen or heard even a single second of it. Their language, not mine, by the way. Egregious harm. And of course, I could use this political commentary of the month to then go ranting about that, but I've already done for nearly 2 hours. I did like an hour and 40-minute long podcast style rant / ramble / really what it really was. It was actually a honest, straightforward breakdown of the entire situation. So if you want the context and all the information behind that whole thing, where literally, like, to celebrate just surpassing 7 straight years here on YouTube, my first ever my YouTube gives me my first ever guideline strike, and it's like, fuck you guys, because it's total bullshit. To put it in the most simple way, they claim I violated their COVID-related content guidelines that they outline. And, of course, because of that, they naturally had a link for me to go look at to verify how I supposedly have been such an evil, bad, misinformed individual because I didn't become part of their echo chamber of mainstream narrative. And I looked through it, including in that video. I looked through it, and I broke even their own guidelines down, and verified, including that video, but let alone to myself in general beforehand, that I, in fact, yeah, it's true. I, in fact, actually did not violate their guidelines at all. In fact, by their very COVID-related content guidelines that they shared with me to supposedly verify, help me see how I brutally violated their guidelines on it, you will actually find that the video in question actually quite literally fits under those exact guidelines, the specific COVID-related content guidelines of YouTube's. It specifically and literally gives exemptions to what they won't allow to that kind of content. Documentative, so documentary, and or educational. In this case, it's easily both. It was like an archive and a way to show and prove, like, basically just as like a historical resource and reference, basically. So as time wears on, people can look at it now, they can look at it 5 years down the road, and they can look and see, and even reference now, for people to look at from around the world, in fact, to see how the mainstream narrative around COVID-19 itself has changed, its statistics and everything else. Its supposed preventative measures. And then, of course, how people's response around the world has been to it. That's it. That's the entire purpose of that video. It's just a big compilation of all of that. So yeah, so basically they claimed I violated their guidelines, which in their own guidelines, it's verifiable that I did not violate anything, because I actually, like, just the guidelines themselves, like, this is how you violate it. Well, I didn't, but then on top of that, again, in those exact guidelines they supposedly violated, they claim, was the exemptions, and that's how I would be exempt from having a strike put on me, and yet they still did it. Which is stupid. Anyway, that's like the summarized edition of that. So if you want to see the entire breakdown of the entire situation, go into my Odyssey, because that is the exclusive place you will see any of those compilations from here on out. Because of these three, Rumble itself and YouTube, it's the only one that I know for a fact is going to be safe, at least for the foreseeable future. It's going to be safe and okay up there, no matter how many views it gets. Now, the reason why I didn't end up putting out a Rumble is because I looked at their terms of service. What is that I'm looking at? Oh, it's the other shoulders, this one. Like random white lint from nothing. From Satan and his demons. That's what it's from. Man, that is one thing about black shirts, White shows up like a mofo. Anyway, I got distracted because I'm total in attention deficit. So I read Gumble's Rumble's terms of service in terms of what content they allow and not allow, right? Just to be sure, I went through and I read it. And the main reason why I figured it was probably good to read Rumbles and not necessarily Odysseys is because Rumble's the one who has gotten endless amounts more constant yearly and daily users and accounts on there. They jumped up between 2021 and 2022, the start of this year. So, start of last year, start of this year. Full calendar year, 365. They jumped up from, I think it was 3.2 million users to 33.6 million daily users, which is insane. So, yeah, like, because of that, and because of how much attention they've drawn from it, both negative and positive, of course, and how much they've grown, that immediately was a red flag to me, or at least a yellow caution flag, of like, you better really look into their terms of service. And of course, they had changed it near the beginning of the year, just like YouTube did, but YouTube does this like every 3 months. So they update their guidelines. So yeah, so I looked at Rumble because I thought, okay, this is potential danger here, that they grew so fast suddenly, and they have such a set of eyes on them now as the main official alternative for most people, that it's a little concerning, because they might have already felt the pressure enough from big tech, fellow big tech, basically, SJWs, and then of course, especially that of like government and stuff. So I went and looked, and it turns out it was smart of me to do that, obviously, because when I looked, it's the parameters for content on there, what's considered safe and okay by their guidelines on Rumble, is exactly like an accidental insurance, or an accidental injury and or death insurance plan. It's outlined like the parameters of one of those. Basically everything is excluded. As in, anything and everything could quite literally violate their guidelines. It's literally that straightforward yet vague at the same time. That doesn't give me any sense of trust that I can put something like that up and it would not get me in violation. And by their own terms with that kind of stuff, if they deem it's violated, they might even go as far as to immediately revoke your privilege to be able to have an account with them at all. Unlike YouTube, who's like, hey, 3-strike policy, you're gone, not counting the pre-warning, so technically 4 things. Rumble here is like, basically, it could be literally the first fucking thing we deem to be violated, and you're gone. And it's just like, I'm not putting that compilation up there. It's not happening, you know? I'm not going to let it happen again. I'm going to put it on the Odyssey, because I know at that point, at least, that's a guarantee that will be able to stay up there. So, again, basically, this is the most summarized, simple version I can give of the entire situation when it comes down to that kind of thing, and why I created Rumble and Odyssey accounts. So now you know. So go follow / subscribe, depending on whichever one they brand it as, on those websites. I don't remember, I'm too dyslexic and I don't care about those kind of weird details because it's technically the same thing. But anyway, so go ahead and do that. If you like my political commentaries and you like the compilation videos and you just want to support generally this kind of more informational and more serious type of stuff, because that's where you're going to guarantee to always see it, is at least on Odyssey. And for the political commentaries, I'm pretty sure it'll be safe at least for the next year or two. Help me, on Rumble. So definitely go look it up there. It's literally, both of them are just by my actual first and last name, so Danny Grog. Just go look that up. It's Grog, like the pirate's favorite drink, with an extra G. A little bit of flab. I'm kidding. Traumatic baggage. But that's a different story. Oh, by the way, you can check out that compilation video that got removed off YouTube and got me this week's suspension on Odyssey. Oh, just Odyssey. So you can go watch that compilation video. It's an hour and 30 minutes. It's well worth all that time, though. For sure. It doesn't matter how you stand on, like, COVID or vaccines or mandates or whatever else. I absolutely recommend you go watch that. I think it's highly imperative. And again, it's not like one of these commentaries. It has no commentary. It has no, like, text inserted into it. Not even the descriptions have anything to do with me or anybody else. It's literally no opinion stated, not stating as anything as fact or fiction, true or false, literally anything. There's no bias put onto it. It's literally just a simple compilation of the narratives, how they've shifted, and then overall people's response around the world to that. So I cannot recommend you check that out enough. That's exclusively on my Odyssey. Again, it's by my first and last name, so Danny Grog. G-R-O-G, like the pirate's favorite drink, with that extra G on the end of that. Simple, easy to do. There you go. Okay, now that I remember to put that in there, get that out of the way. So not on that topic, we're going to talk about the other topic. If they're not talking about that, everybody's going to be thinking about talking about this one here. And I bet you can't guess what it is. I'm kidding, of course. We all can guess what it is. It is the Ruski. That just means Russian. It is Rus and Ukraine. Now, Ukraine and Russia. I'm not going to try, like, anything I say in this is not so much me beating a war drum or saying it's never going to happen either. I'm not trying to say it is or isn't, no matter how it may sound to you. I just want to make that very clear. I want to make it very clear. Top half of the top 1%. I just want to make it very clear. Very clear. I am Bernie Sanders. I have so much fun with that. I'm getting better at that too. I love it. Anyway, Bernie Sanders here to talk to you about Kermit the Frog here to talk to you about tyranny. No, funnier. Sorry. Anyway, I should apologize for having fun. Fuck you. that's a more appropriate response. I respect you, but still fuck you. If you have a problem with that. Anyway, where was I? Trying to get myself back into it, right? So, Ruski and Ukraine. So yeah, at no point am I going to be like beating a war drum or doing the opposite or anything like that. It's just my general observances, my general thoughts, and the way that things I've noticed, and thus I feel like is kind of important to the topic. You know, the first thing I want to get out of the way, because I feel like this is a proper first thing to just get out of the way ahead of time, context and otherwise, is there is a constant narrative the last at least decade, maybe a bit longer, where there's this constant claim from the experts and other people otherwise that are constantly trying to claim and say definitively that somehow, some way, Russia was started from the Kingdom of Kiev. That is verifiably false. That's a very recent twist and change. Therefore, technically, you could even say manipulation, mainstream-wise, on the history that had always been verified as, well, would verify that that was complete bullshit, that it's misinformation. That's right. Because experts can misinform you too, whether because of the money that they get given to do so, the political interests that are pushing them to do that in order to not be blackballed, colleagues, whatever else. That's the way it is. And in that case, that's what they're doing. Because yes, it did play a integral role in more, I would say, unifying the different Slavic groups of modern day. It would be in mainly Eastern Europe, and a little bit in Western modern Russia. Because it wasn't just Kiev. That Kiev was the last one of these historical kingdoms that had been around for a long time at that point, that had came together to form what we now call Russia. Except before it was even called Russia, it was originally just called Rus, R-U-S. Then it became Roisa, Russia. Now you know how that evolution happened. But they were the last one to join in because they knew, and historically they were always somewhat different. They were incredibly similar. They obviously were Slavic. They had a lot of shared heritage history, but no, they knew even back then they were not the same people with the same history. They had a lot of similar history. They had a lot of shared. But they did not make them the same people or the same history at all. And they fully understood that back then, and they would still be right to claim that now. The fact is that the original ones, historically, and this is as the original history went for hundreds of years, in fact, is that Novgorod, Pskov, yes, because the P is silent, and there is two others I'm not remembering right now. I always forget at least one of them, if not two of them. But Novgorod, Pskov, and there's two other major kingdoms that were all further north than Kiev ever went, that actually were the original formers of the original Russia, Rus. They were the original ones who formed it. And Novgorod is especially the predominant one. They were the ones who took the charge and led to form it. Alongside of, again, one of the main ones I'm forgetting. My head is swearing it's a P, but I don't remember if it is. They were the ones who actually formed Russia. Kiev, reluctantly, was the last of those, well, that would be total including them of 5 kingdoms to come together to say, sure, okay, we'll claim to the same heritage and everything, and we'll agree to help form this kingdom of Rus. That's how Russia formed. It was multiple different kingdoms that had very much heavily shared interests in history. Yes, they had a shared heritage of being Slavic, but that does not mean that they're the same people. And it certainly didn't mean that they had exactly the same history and culture and heritage or whatever else. They absolutely had unique differences. This is something that they no longer teach, because they keep trying to teach that instead it came strictly out of Kiev, which is total bullshit. Plus, you got to consider where the historical kingdom of Kiev was back then, which is actually modern day and pretty much current Ukraine. And so, of course, that meant that they were under Kumania for a long time. They were under a bunch of other steppe people for a long time. They were under the fucking Magyars, the Hungarian, what would later become the Hungarians, for a long time. They were under the Bulgars for a while. They were under the Turks for a while. They were under a bunch of fucking conquering people and crusading people for a long time, especially more modern history within the last 1,000 years. To say that that was shared all the way up through like Novgorod and all that, up modern day where basically St. Petersburg and Tallinn and all that is. So Estonia and, again, modern day Russia with St. Petersburg and everything. Karelia, that would be to lie, because it's not true at all. So I just wanted to get that part out of the way first, because the narrative that's being shared, including by experts, that are trying to claim that somehow Russia is strictly formed out of Kiev is a total bald-faced lie and intentional manipulation of history. And thus, again, by definition, the modern catchphrase, the modern branding, the modern sensational wording, is called misinformation. By definition, that is literally what that is. So I wanted to get that part out of the way, because that's important, integral to the whole Russia-Ukraine thing, because that's one of the things that Russia, and especially Vladimir Putin, has a big history on harping about. And Vladimir was always romanticized about this for a long time, specifically this exact thing. So even he is using, what I'm sure, because you can tell he's a very adept, intelligent, smart, observant individual, very methodical. So I wouldn't doubt that he knows fully that this edition of history is false. But of course it benefits him and his regime in Russia right now to push that further, because then it gives them historical precedence to claim that they should then basically annex Ukraine, because they're one people, which is not true. They're very similar, again, they have very similar shared histories, cultures, you get the idea, but they're still different, very different. They're not the same. They're not wholly shared, and therefore it doesn't really give historical precedence by a logic standpoint. So, again, that's why that's important to get out of the way first. The thing that we're allowed to get, at least, and we're being fed, we're being shown and told, the bits of information about this and perspectives that we're allowed to see and hear here in the US, and I'm sure in Western Europe and stuff like that, if you really think about it, it's kind of minimal. And you could tell it's just enough to paint a very specific set of pictures. One of two debated pictures. One is war drum beating picture. It's inevitable. The other one is the opposite. So it's not going to happen. It would be too costly for Russia, whatever else. Some people are beating both of them at the same time. Some outlets are doing the same thing. Just instead of like saying definitively yes or no, or beating one or drum or the other, I wanted to actually point out again my observances. It's some very interesting points that are very imperative, I think, and very important to understand the situation at hand and what the likely result is going to be in the end, whether there's a war or not, because it gives a broader perspective than what we're being fed to really kind of realize and help you make up your own mind about what the likely outcome here is going to be. So, in a few days, or like a week or two, the official Winter Olympics in Beijing, China, are officially set to open and start and begin, and other synonyms of these words here. And already, that's obviously a bit of a red flag, especially if you know China's history. Especially with big distracting events like that the world pays close attention to, and you look at their historical playbook, you realize, as much as I hate giving them credit for this, it is kind of intelligent, and even as simplistic as it is, the whole tactics here. Because you have to go back to, especially, and most specifically, the Korean War. Because in the 50s, during the Korean War, China was backing up what we now know as North Korea. And the entire world stage was super, engrossed in watching that battlefield and getting all the information they could out of it. And the world was invested in that. And so, as a result, China had the very simple and logical tactic to further emphasize and further have everybody focus even more on the front lines of the Korean War. But in reality, what they were doing is they're doing that to further guarantee a long-term distraction for however less the rest of the long it took for not only that war to come to some sort of an armistice at least, which is actually what it's in. So technically that war's never ended. It's still technically considered to be going. But more specifically, more helpful for them was to go and invade, militaristically, go basically occupy Tibet. So that once the war ended, now the world had to recognize, oh, look what we did. Look, going through the back door that you left open and nobody was guarding or paying attention to. Because everybody was focusing on the front door, aka the Korean War. Would you look at that? We've been occupying Tibet now for this whole time, for a few years now. So we're going to take that as our territory sovereignly now. and we're going to annex that. That's going to have to be part of the deal, whether it's an armistice or whatever else. We won't accept it unless, of course, we get given Tibet. And the rest of the world, because it didn't ever have anything to do with that war, technically and legally, globally or locally, they pretty much had to concede that to them and give them Tibet, which Tibet, before that, was, of course, an independent, sovereign nation, self-governing. Well, they took it over. And that's how they did it. It was literally that simple. They just went and used the Korean War front to distract the rest of the world and to make sure everybody was focused so much on that so that they could slip through the back door while it was still kept open, that nobody was near and nobody had a sightline of. So they could just casually go walk out the back door and then decide, I'm going to occupy this nation, and then, boom, I'm going to suddenly have more land. That was their tactic. So, and stepping back into history, you see that that's what they like to do. Of course, they've also adopted their own rendition of the U.S.'s one of their favorite tactics, debt diplomacy. You know, going into some impoverished or some developing nations and saying, hey, we'll give, a few $1 billion worth of investment into your infrastructure or whatever, or ports, whatever you need, and we'll build it for you, only if you agree to allow to have us and our people and our corporations and companies come in to develop these things and to engineer and to lead the blueprinting and everything else. Basically, literally do everything. And, obviously, something that seems like a lucrative long-term deal that they, in theory, could potentially pay off later. But, of course, that's not actually how it works. They intentionally they get to a certain point, then they stop or they slow it down. And then they'll suddenly have some excuse as to why it had to happen. And then suddenly, maybe it's a few months, a few weeks, or it's a few years later, and they might slowly start up again, but they're going even slower than before, and then they might pick up pace, and maybe they'll complete it, maybe they won't. But the idea is so that you can get more and more, cause that country to go more and more into debt, and then at the same time, you're killing as much time as you can so you can get it closer and closer to the point of when they will owe you the money that they have to pay you back, that they know you won't have. So then it's debt trap diplomacy, see, because it traps you in their debt. Now you're indebted to them. And that's also one of the oldest plays in the book by major empires, by thus England, France, don't know about Germany, but but definitely England and France have done that before. I know that Italy has done that before. I don't know about the Dutch. I know that Belgium's done that before. And then, of course, the U.S. is infamous for doing that same kind of shit, especially further back in time. They loved debt trap diplomacy because what it enabled them to do is then say, well, you owe us so much and you'll never be able to afford to pay us back, so I guess we'll just occupy your land now. And then by international law and code and creed, after a while of occupation, the finality of it is you got to either become our puppet or we're going to completely annex you. And it's usually annexation. It's the oldest play in the book. Whatever way you can get your boots on the ground militaristically and then occupy that nation for a long time, you can then, by international law, annex it after a long enough period of time. And I wouldn't be surprised if China decides to go further with that. No. So basically, they have their own version of that they're doing. Their own version of the U.S.'s old school, devoteeism when it comes to that kind of stuff. And it's a little bit more wicked and sinister, of course, but also a bit more subtle and slow. And that serves them even further. So anyway, the point of mentioning all of that, and it goes to mention one more thing, actually a couple more things, is that obviously we all know, they never shut the fuck up about it, China is big on historical precedents, kind of like Russia's becoming. But they're especially becoming that, and they have been that obsessively all the time over Taiwan. And of course, they're making all these stupid little moves for show on the global stage, which also actually helps distract too. But the idea is this, militaristic show of power, supposedly might. Like, we don't care. Got to do sudden military exercises over Taiwanese sovereign territory and water or whatever, So they badly want that. Russia badly wants Ukraine at the moment, among a bunch of other things, but especially Ukraine. I mean China too, but More so Russia is like other things, but especially Ukraine right now. So those are the two focuses of those two nations. Yes, they do not have a alliance. They, at least not since near the end of World War II, they haven't had a formal alliance since then, official alliance. So they're not technically allied. Of course, they work heavily together. So yeah, and their economies are very much reliant's probably not the right word, but they are very much intertwined. They definitely benefit each other heavily, and they're getting closer to relying on each other, admittedly. Getting back to the other point with China, that, I mentioned that and the Taiwan thing. So, no, I did mention both of those things. And yeah, you got to keep in mind, of course, the Olympics are literally like a few days away, or at max 2 weeks. I'm pretty sure it's like a few days to a week away from the start of the Olympics in Beijing, which is already a red flag. But on top of that, and of course they've been doing military exercises all the time with each other. They allow each other military access into each other's waters and land, and so they're exercising with each other all the time, military exercises of every kind, especially up in the Arctic as navies. So that's always exciting stuff, especially considering, again, you have the Ukraine thing. That's a dangerous prospect, because the Olympics are clearly the cornerstone here. They are the pillar of what I think is the most important piece of information is those Olympics, because it's a perfect distraction piece. Even I could have just left it as simple as that. The Olympics are the perfect global distraction piece. So if you focus everything on there, especially at the beginning of the Olympics, and you focus everything on there, or just the Olympics entirely, right? And right as it's about to climax, or right as it's about to end, or just a couple of days before it ends, or even just after it ends, in between a few hours to like, maybe a week or two, then suddenly invasions happen. Like, it's the definition of perfection for a distraction piece globally. So everybody's going to be focused on that. Everybody's mad at me. It's China, like, oh, I'm going to boycott them and not go there. It's not going to do anything. Like, cool, but you're only fabricating and putting more global attention, including our citizenry, on them and the Olympics. So, whoops, maybe you're fucking up there. So I personally, already because of that, it's like there wouldn't be a better time than now. Well, actually, sorry, a better time than then, when they're happening, or right as they started. While like in the middle of them happening would not be the like that's like right before the apex of the Olympics. That's the perfect fucking time for them to just like launch their fucking invasions while everybody's distracted. Now, another point you have to consider with this and potentiality for the the war, whatever you want to call it, to break out in Ukraine and maybe even Taiwan, invasions, whatever, is also the fact that, again, most of these Western nations, quote unquote, as people keep saying and pointing out, have their own massive issues to deal with, especially with their own people. There's a lot of unrest that's growing in each of these countries, including, obviously, the United States is a big one. Australia is a huge one. Kiwi land, so New Zealand is a big one that's recently found themselves going the autocratic route too, alongside of Australia, which is like the head of it. Austria, Germany, Poland even, which is actually kind of funny and ironic and also sad because it's Poland, they can never catch a break, and now England, so the UK, France, and of course the US. And even, actually, good old Canada, Canuckland, Moose Meesland. Yes. Yeah. Isn't it great? Everything's going autocratic in all these different places. And they're pushing further and faster every day. There's those things, our governments. And of course, the people are also already getting pissed off and upset before that, but now it's just like sparking it even further. And of course, the pandemic, they gotta worry about that, and people getting apathetic about that and doing anything about it. They gotta deal with the top half of the top 1%. No, that's what people should be focusing on, but no, of course, they got you dealing with a culture war, and a morality war, and a thought war, so that they can distract you from the real war that everybody should be fighting and unified in, and that's a class war. Getting rid of, or at least balancing out or getting better the classes and getting fucking rid of the rich and powerful from controlling the world. But different story. Anyway, point made though. Still kind of fits, but digression. So yeah, you have all of that shit you have to deal with and focus on. And so yeah, basically, they're all of our nations are already more distracted, including politically, than they have been for a long time. And of course, this is looking at it from a perspective as the average person would, and any mainstream person would, and the experts would, which is that they actually are, all nations function completely separately, they're all controlled by different people, and it totally has nothing to do with the rich elites of the world that are going and controlling the entire world and all the governments. Which, you know my stance on that if you've listened to any of my political commentaries. I'm absolutely the latter. I stand fully on that. But if we're going to go off the average one and pretend, or at least pin it like that, where, oh yes, every nation is totally autonomous, independent of each other, and it can only be coincidence that they might do the same shit, right? Yeah, you know, like, going that route with it, sticking with that though. Yeah, so, like, all these different nations are super distracted with their own citizenry getting pissed off at their policies and their bullshit that they're pulling. And, of course, the rich bastards who control 90% of the fucking corporations and now own over 60% of the housing in the United States alone. All this other stupid shit. It's to this extent, this point, that it's like they have to deal with their own fire that they've lit. They literally lit themselves on fire, and now they have to sit here and be like, I gotta point the fingers at all my citizens and say, you're to blame for me being on fire, even though I lit myself on fire, but we don't speak about that detail because that's inconvenient to me. Governments, in a nutshell. Especially the Western world ones. You know, the most progressive, intelligent, and free. In a nutshell. That's what they're doing. They're lighting themselves on fire, pouring tons of gasoline and other flammable materials on themselves, throwing a fucking napalm bomb on themselves and being like, oh God, why did my citizens set me on fire? They need to be set straight. This clearly was not my fault. I totally did not light myself on fire because that would be reality and I can't admit that because that would be inconvenient to my agenda. Welcome to the modern world. It's great. So yeah, they gotta deal with their repercussions of their own self-immolation. And potentially, maybe even hopefully, implosions. Because it's getting to a boiling point. I mean, it has for years, but it's especially this last year has been really ramping up. If you really look at the entire perspective, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. People in these different countries like this, US, Canada, Austria, obviously the UK, Australia, etc., are gonna finally get to that boiling point where they just snap, and it's over now. It's time to just fucking, like, if you gotta go to war with your government and you're rich and powerful, then you gotta do that, because it's just like something's gotta give. Eventually, the collective is gonna hit their limit, and they're gonna snap, and we're closing in on that. And they're recognizing that, which is also, I sincerely believe, why they're bum rushing autocracy, at least as a start point, so they can launch into full-on dictatorship and totalitarianism later. Because they're recognizing their window is fucking closing, and it's closing really fucking fast. Mainly because of their own actions, but they would never admit that to themselves. They're going to claim it's us, even though they also don't want to claim that we're smart, so, or aware of what they're doing. Who the fuck knows what's going on in these fucking morons' heads, these puppet masters' heads? But, point being, yeah, they gotta deal with that. So, they're more than self-distracted. They're distracted with themselves and their own citizens and people and their own self-immolation. They gotta deal with it. And so, likely it is, they're not gonna want to get involved or actually really do anything, even if invasions happen. They'd be like, well, you know, let's just, bad dog, bad child. Stick your nose in the corner. And if it doesn't work, they'll just keep doing it. Because it's like, and, sanctions, in other words, and big bluster talk, and, supposed vague threats of retaliation. But it's like as more and more people are starting to realize, they don't think it's likely to ever come to anything other than, well, just pretty much allowing it to happen, because, and then applying sanctions on them for who the fuck knows how long, because they don't really care, let's face it, but at the same time, it's this, really the main thing is, again, they're very self-distracted. They have to deal with their own shit at this point. You know, the collapse of Western quote-unquote democracy, which never was a democracy, different story, but you get the idea. Whatever you want to call it, you can brand it as that or whatever else. The collapse of the Western world is definitely a real thing, and it's definitely been happening for a while. It's just finally more and more people are starting to wake up and realize the cracks have become a little too loud and obvious in all of the foundations and the pillars that held it up. And it's leaning and sinking a little bit faster than we wanted to believe it was, so now we have to pay attention, at least. Maybe even mention it here and there offhand. Well, maybe it's not. It's just a observance that might not be real. Probably isn't, because, you know, it's apparently impossible for the U.S. to collapse in on itself or fail, which is horseshit, because every nation that said that dies. In fact, actually, in history, it's literally been exclusively to themselves. So, yeah, go figure. Arrogance is what will kill a nation. Their own exceptionalism. All of those things considered, there's another thing you have to consider. Apparently, it's became very, very obvious to those who've been paying attention, and or more so, and I shouldn't be saying paying attention to that specifically, the economic stuff, and especially like by ways of Russia and China, let alone in general, just people who do a lot of research and look really deep into the transactions and sort of between them and the rest of the world and everything. And apparently it's now factually confirmed and turned out that, in fact, good old Ruski and China both have been stockpiling almost all of the world's corn, wheat, a few other grains, and I can't remember what else they're stockpiling. They've been stockpiling for a while, but especially the last couple of years, they're really going gung-ho with it. And, yeah, they're also ramping up their own production of it, and they're continuing it. So, they already have the majority of those two grains. They're pretty much guaranteed to have at least 60% of the entire global supply of corn, wheat, rice. That was one of the other grains. And I can't remember what else it was, food-wise, that they've managed to completely stockpile and ramp up their own production of. And they're just like stockpiling, and basically, in other words, they're storing it away and withholding it from the rest of the world. Probably in part, at least for themselves, but also for other people. If you look at history, when nations do that, it almost exclusively occurs and transpires whenever a major, massive war is about to happen. And also, therefore, these bigger nations that do that and can afford to do that, well, they're usually at least some of the main actors and instigators in those wars and causing them. So, that's something you have to pay close attention to, too. History, so far, has dictated exclusively that it usually is an indicator of a massive major war. A literal world war. Whether it was ever considered a world war, because it's only ever considered to be two. But if you look at a handful of other wars that have happened, you could technically consider it global, because there was nations from different parts of the globe that were involved on either side of those wars. So that's an important detail to remember and keep in mind as well when looking at the whole entire perspective. With that said, there's one little detail that could mean a lot, or could mean next to nothing. It could just be a show of force, or at least a scare tactic. So there was a fairly sizable portion of Russia's navy, specifically warships, that were sitting out in outside of St. Petersburg. Then, as of a few days ago, they went and they decided to move them out and through the North Sea. So, likelihood is, and what people are figuring, is that obviously that's likely to mean that they're trying to send that down to the Black Sea. And if they're doing that, then of course that would usually mean and indicate that they're preparing to do at least massive exercises to show force and to scare or pressure, if not actually literally set up to then use them against somebody in that vicinity. So we'll see if they show up there in the Black Sea or not. If they do, then it raises the concern level even a little bit more, because at that point, even if it is again just war games, it's just games of beating a war drum and trying to scare people and pressure people and nations and everything. It's something to consider on that front, obviously. With all of that kind of stuff out of the way, in your head, and also, of course, the global stage political jockeying that Alexander Lukashenko, the dictator of Belarus, of White Russia, he's been publicly spouting all this positive stuff towards Russia against Ukraine, and how basically if there was a invasion and or war started over annexing and occupying Ukraine, that they would absolutely and implicitly, in a heartbeat, immediately be right alongside Russia and insert their troops in there too, and be a big ally to Russia in their war against Ukraine. Which makes sense again if you look at the jockeying and political standings and stuff like that, and the histories and the romanticization of shit, and even the USSR that both Vladimir Putin and Lukashenko have and keep spouting, right? Writing about no whatever else, because literally Putin made a fucking blog post about it, about romanticizing bringing Ukraine back under the banner of Russians, because of course they're all the same people. Yeah, it makes sense, because one of the reasons why Lukashenko has always been so close with Vladimir is because of the fact they're both autocrats. Obviously, that's one of them. Go figure. Like attracts like. But at the same time, Alexander Lukashenko is an asshole that's like, hey, I kind of want the same thing that Vladimir does. I romanticize and think of it kind of the same way, at least publicly. I like to claim this and push for that kind of shit, to where I want to force everything under my dictation in my nation, so that way we can be in unison with them, and then go and basically reform a pseudo USSR state. That is specifically, when I say that, it's really geographically at least. So land area and water. That's really what that basically means. Yeah, that part of it makes sense too, that they're going to be, at least he's going to try to stand vocally on a world stage. He's going to try to act like that and side with Vladimir Putin's Russia on the Ukraine thing. Now that that's laid out, I'd let it for you to determine and decide what it is that you think will or will not happen, and or when it will transpire, if you think it will transpire. But with that out of the way, again, as I alluded to earlier, my actual standing is that it doesn't the world does not work that way at all. Because if it did, I don't think like 90% of the shit that we have to deal with around the world as just everyday people trying to get by day to day in our lives and live and keep a roof over our head, whatever else, would even be here. It would even be a thing if it was like that in reality. To me, what it is that's part of the whole global puppet show of governance, politics. Every politician, all the way through to the freaking presidencies, are, to me, 100% puppets. Their strings are just getting pulled in any indescript direction by their puppet masters at the top. And the puppet masters at the top are the rare and few, far between, global rich bastards who own and control like 90% of the world's everything, And I sincerely believe that they, in fact, do really, legitimately control the world. They pull all the strings of all those leaders, every single one of them. And so as a result, to me, this would just be another part of the puppet show. They just want you to think, oh, these guys are allies. These guys hate each other, so they consider each other basically like evil villains that they need to deal with or whatever. Whether it's like in the U.S.'s example here at home, it would be obviously it would be the U.S. towards Iran, the U.S. towards Russia, because they're actually always been really tight knit friends and hate each other. Yeah, Russia towards the U.S. or China towards the U.S. Whatever. Britain, them towards Britain, France, Germany. The reality and the truth of it is, I guess, especially if my personal perspective and take on this is right, globally, is the fact that this whole system of how the world would operate at that point, it's all a lie. Like everything we see, even the alliances and the adversaries and everything else, the hatreds that on a public global stage or even local stage is all fabricated as part of the damn puppet show to distract us and to keep us thinking that we're smart enough and aware enough to know what they really are up to, what they're really doing. But in reality, it actually only keeps us only even more secured under their thumbs. Or more realistically, instead of under their thumbs, it would be getting socked upside the fucking face by their iron fists and then their throats crushed by their iron boots. That's the much more accurate, I think, analogy for it all. And so if that's the case, then none of this I just said is even real. None of it really matters. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen. The Ukraine might oh God, the politicians, including Zelensky, might be like, oh God, we just got annexed, oh God, this is terrible, why didn't the world stand up for us? But in reality, that was all part of the fucking blueprint and the plan. It's just to act it up as a good little acting puppet for the show, for the masses, aka we the people of the world, to think is real. But in reality, it's just part of the whole puppet show. Behind the curtains, the strings are being pulled by these people, and the story, the script, whatever, is going as intended. And yeah, and you gotta admit, how would be anything like this is a fantastic distraction piece, and a fantastic piece of work, especially considering, again, throughout history, they've always orchestrated this whole thing in nationality. The nationality, the focal point, is specifically the idea of sovereignty or freedom or whatever else, that your nation is the big cultural thing for you. In the U.S., it's freedom and democracy, right? Well, at least the illusions of that have always been perpetually present here, which would be the point, right? Because then you really believe in it, you really think you actually have it when you don't, and then you're going to fight for it. Maybe even literally fight for it as a mercenary, aka a member of the military and armed forces of your nation, whether it's here or whatever else. And then that means what you're really doing as a merc is you're just doing their fucking bidding for them. That's what you're doing. You're serving your purpose that they have outlined for you. Just like you work as a cog in the system from the day you're born to the day you die. That's intended, I guarantee you. That's 100%. The system is working exactly as it was built to function. It was literally practicality based. It was purpose built exclusively and specifically, and that's it. Nothing else was added. So it's literally functioning exactly as they intended it and made it to function. And I do sincerely believe that. But yeah, so then, like I said, everything would have to be thrown out the window because it's just part of the show. So now this is really real. So if Ukraine goes to get occupied or even annexed, or there's a big world war suddenly breaking out because of that in Taiwan, it's still orchestration. And again, you would think about it, another reason why it's a perfect distraction piece is because, again, like I was saying before, part of that point I was going to try to make there is it makes you feel scared, right? It makes you feel under threat. It makes you and your friends and your family and your own values feel under threat. And it also makes you feel terrible, which then brings your mood down, which brings your psyche down, which brings your mentality and your mental state down, which brings your energy down, and everything else subsequently down with it. That makes you more tired, more nervous, more jittery, more jumpy, more easily scared or intimidated. more impressionable, easier to manipulate and control in terms of how you think and what you're perceiving things as, because again, you become the more emotional you are, and the more emotional, darker, lower energy state you're in, the easier it is to manipulate a human brain. That's just how it works. That's the oldest fucking play in their entire playbook. That's what they've been doing even right now. That's why they have, again, as some people have said, they have all of us trying to fight a culture and a morality and a thought war, when in reality, that's exactly as intended. Because if we got us doing that, then we're going to further divide and conquer our own damn selves. And they don't have to lift a fucking finger to conquer and kind of have complete control over us. If they divide us, have us dividing ourselves more and more and more and more and more, and hating each other more and more and more and more because, well, you're different than I am, and you think differently than I do, and you have different sources than I do, and you have different reasoning than I do, and you have different logic than I do, and you believe, I believe Fauci, but you believe insert, but you believe Robert Malone, or yeah, I believe and like to watch Fox or CNN, but you like to believe and listen to Russell Brand and Joe Rogan, whatever else. Like, that's the system functioning exactly as they fucking intended it to. The blueprint is still exactly as it was when they first fucking made it and implemented it into the world. It's functioning as intended. If they can do that, then you're not only super distracted by fighting amongst each other and trying to take each other out, and constantly being bitter about that, which already furthers everything I said before. Because now it's making you more angry, it's making you more triggerable and vulnerable in that regard. It's making you way more emotional, because the fact that now you're falling into your emotional impulsiveness of responding angrily or out of tension or frustration, you're feeling way more stressed, etc. It goes right back to, see how it's like a fucking spider web. It goes right back to it's like a hub and spoke system. That spoke in that part of the thing just sprung itself right back to the center again. Now you're back to square one. I'm telling you, it's fucking orchestrated. Everything is fucking orchestrated and running exactly as they plan. So all this is a perfect distraction piece. And then at that point, that and then these wars and everything else, right? It's just a tool to distract, but then not only distract, but it also, again, obviously doubles down as making you more vulnerable and prone to being able to be controlled and manipulated, because the fact that, like everything I listed, right? Anger, stress, tension, division, being more intimidated or intimidatable, more scared or easily scared, more unnerved, more uneasy, more unsure and confused, exhausted, etc. Gives them everything they want and need to be able to manipulate, control, etc. Make the impression on you. And if they do it in the right way, which they have done for the longest time, it will actually have it to where you think that you came up with that, or that you personally chose to believe it, when in reality you were manipulated into it. Again, that's the saddest part of a human brain and mind, is that it's that intensely easy to take complete control over by somebody else to do that to somebody else, basically. It's way too easy. And so this whole thing keeps spinning right back to square one again of my point. So there's nothing else much to say. It's a self-fulfilling cycle. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? You get to that point, and do you notice how I branch off? Branch. The direct parallels to each other, they're super related, they're super close. They come from the same point, but once you get to the end of the spoke, you get to the wheel, which eventually, in this case, the web, you get to the outside, it's eventually going to weave its way all the way back to the center again. So you just keep technically repeating yourself. Every fucking spoke you go down, every section you go down, you will find yourself making yourself right back to square one, as is exemplified right here. Which, again, to me, makes it make even more logical and perfect sense that it is all orchestrated and running exactly as functional and intended to function. As in, likelihood is, even an occupation and or all-out war would serve their purpose. It would serve them well, and us badly, which is exactly how it serves them well. And it would be 100% in the plans. It's in their script. Because it's not actually, oh, this is terrible, we didn't want this because we hate each other. It's we're all in bed together, and we're all advancing our collective agenda together. Just fits, man. I don't know what else to say on that topic. That's just the way it is. But I digress. Anyway, yeah, there you go. That's how it goes. So let me know what you think in the comments section, of course, about anything and everything I said here, or even as a whole, or as the two different parts. Just let me know. I would love to see it. I would love to hear it. Have your perspective, even if it is completely opposite. It's important to be able to have and add and hear and listen to and see all these different opposing perspectives on anything. In fact, I would even go as far as to say that every form of misinformation should absolutely be allowed to be preached, not just said and uncensored and uncontrolled and unpoliced, but literally straight up preached and demanded to be true. That should be a freedom and right for everything, because then it also is helpful for everyone else, right? Because at least at that point, on our own logic and what makes the most sense to us in our personal life experiences, right, so far, that whatever that is that makes the most sense to us naturally is of course going to inevitably end up being what we see as the most logical, and therefore we're going to end up thinking and we're going to end up believing and following with, because this is what clicks, right? So it's really helpful in that sense, because then it also helps us personally weed out who we think is the stupid one. Even though technically, if we think that person's out of their fucking mind, they're a lunatic, they're stupid, that they'll make no fucking sense, it's probably a guarantee that that person's thinking and feeling exactly the same thing about you or us, because that's called life. It's called unique individuality. But that's also why it's all the more important, and that's why I would go as far as to say that all forms of misinformation should always be allowed to be fully voiced and shared, even preached and demanded to be correct. And it should be up to each individual person to think for themselves, do their research, and really verify with themselves if this is what makes the most sense to them or not. It's how we learn, it's how we grow, and it's a true free world at that point, right? And yeah, it would help us weed out who, and maybe even avoid, if we're that kind of person, anybody who we don't like, what we would interpret, I guess, personally, as lack of intelligence or sanity of. That's why I would go as far as to say that. But anyway, so that's why I would love for you to share it. No matter if it's the farthest out thing in the world to me, I would love to be able to see and hear that opinion and that perspective, at the very least, from you. So please do leave that comment down below. It would be really greatly appreciated. Thank you, truckers. Seriously, though. Anywhere in the world, but especially here in North America, because, again, it's at least over 60% of everything. I would guarantee you it's probably more like over 70% of literally every good and service and everything else that you will find in the store, that you will get from Amazon, because they go to the warehouses, that you will have delivered to your door, you name it, or you find at a furniture store or any kind of store. All of that shit, 70+% guaranteed in the entirety of North America, let alone just the US and Canada, is delivered by fucking trucks. And that is one of the most intensely thankless jobs on the face of the earth. Like, think about it. When have you ever thought to just stop and thank a trucker if you have an opportunity? Do you ever think to do that? Because the truth is, I guarantee you, that's a no. Nobody thinks to do that. And it's one of the most thankless, intense jobs, yet it's one of the most essential jobs. Like, literally, the only way we're allowed to live our lives as we always have, or we have for the longest time, I should say, more specifically, though it is a little pickier, but you get the idea, is because of those fuckers. The truckers. Those fuckers, the truckers. Sincerely, truly, madly, deeply. So, from the bottom of my heart, I sincerely mean it. Thank you to any and all truckers out there. Sincerely, you guys are... I love that the Freedom Convoy up in Canada has really, just made me, it just hit me upside the head like an epiphany. I'm like, I knew this shit already, and I didn't even think about that. That's actually insane. That's one of the saddest fucking things. So, thank you to all truckers out there. And I hope that this really awakens, at least in North America, not the rest of the world, this recognition, not just for truckers, but all sorts of other people that are doing thankless fucking jobs that are doing the fucking best they can just to fucking keep a roof over their head and get by, and or take care of their friends, family, or their kids or whatever. Seriously, like it's, and they're literally, some of them are keeping the fucking world running, literally, and all of our lives propped up. That literally without them we would not be able to live our lives in any way, shape, or form, any semblance remotely close and related to how we do now. So like, not just short careers, but everybody else. And I not just hope that that happens for now, I hope it happens long term, if not maybe even permanently, where it causes people to really keep thinking, like, and being very conscious of reality, of like, I gotta thank these people because holy shit, they literally keep my fucking life running. They keep not just mine, they keep my friends, my families, my colleagues, my everybody's. They keep my business running, you know, like, because they do. And in this case, in North America, one of those critical workers is truckers. So, my sincerest thanks to all of you out there, but especially you truckers right now. Especially considering it's the most thankless, one of the most thankless fucking jobs out there, but the most intensely essential. Again, at least in North America. And yet, you guys have gone out of your way for literally everybody. It doesn't matter if people couldn't hate you and disagree with you right now more than ever and actually believe the bullshit lied claims that it's only white supremacists, Trumpsters, conspiracy theorists, etc., 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 over supporting these trucker movements, let alone in them. Which is total fucking lies. Like, if you actually pay close attention, not to mainstream media, of course, as always, because they barely reported on it all, and the only ones they did, they tried to claim those claims. So what you gotta do is you gotta look at the non-mainstream media. The people, the actual boots on the ground, the horses' mouths themselves, you can actually look at that. Freedom Convoy 2022 on Twitter, Instagram, he might also be elsewhere. But he's kept complete direct track of that the whole time. Rebel News, which is an independent media source, they've been boots on the ground, horses' mouths, tracking the whole fucking thing up there in Canada, including the border, the Coulter border blockade by truckers, has been covered closely by Rebel News. It's one of those people for covering it for us, because the mainstream's never going to give it to us. So it's good to have the truth from them themselves, especially considering they're literally boots on the ground the whole fucking time. 24/7 coverage. Like, it's been beautiful. So to be able to see that, and then all the people who supported that and were there, and not just in Ottawa or Coulter border, but also all across Canada. Like, fucking hell. Like, all those people capturing it from the bridges, watching the convoys go by and supporting them, showing the people supporting, what have you, doing their own things. Victoria, fucking BC, had well over 100,000 people the main day of the Ottawa occupation from Freedom Convoy for their own support for the convoy and against mandates and everything. It's incredible to see this kind of unity. I've literally, in my 28 years, as of a few days ago, my 28 years of life, I've never seen such a sight. I've never heard or felt such a vibration and energy from a movement. I've never seen such a movement in my entire living life thus far. Almost 30 years, 3 decades. Never. It literally brought me to tears and super emotional roller coaster state, especially a few days ago when I saw like this amazingly beautiful clip and insanely like over my head. Like, I couldn't fucking understand, like, I still can't fucking figure out how to describe it. Clip of just seeing the convoy on the freeway, and it's just like, not only all the like thousands and thousands of people out in sub-zero and even below zero at night temperatures, snowing, like foot of snow on the ground across Canada, and they're just out there, standing out in it, no care in the world, because they truly are unified. And that's the definition of fucking real unity right there. Doesn't matter any differences. Everybody of every ethnicity, race, nationality, language, culture, you name it, age, gender was out there. In thousands and thousands and thousands. Some of them are still out there supporting these truckers and all the freedom fighters and stuff. And it's incredible to watch. But like, it wasn't just them; it was literally the convoy itself. When in, at least for us younger people, when the fuck in our lives have we ever seen such a thing where it's literally like there is just this sudden drop everything, let's all unify and just let's fucking make a statement. Even if it takes weeks, we'll do it, you know. And just instant glue. Like, instantly everybody gels and everybody's like, yep, unified, you know. And just to see literally as far as the eye can see, and you know that already, like, literally thousands, maybe even tens of thousands of truckers and trucks had already passed by these bridges by that point, and you still can't see, even crystal clear day, you can't see all the way down the fucking freeway, like, no trees, by the way, out in the middle of nowhere in the plain states, or, well, provinces of Canada, like, you still can't see the end of the fucking convoy even then. Think about that. And you knew that there was still probably another, like, maybe even 24 hours worth of trucks beyond that sight line. Or beyond the next sight line that you would have. It's insane. Literally millions upon millions of people, Canadians alone, were unified. And still are. It's literally became worldwide despite a lack of, like, basically a mainstream media blackout and government blackout of it. But because of the boots on the ground, the horse's mouths, the very people themselves, covering it and sharing it all over the place, doing that, the entire world, literally round, saw this shit and heard it, and for the real deal, not the media stuff, the little bit that you're given. And it's just like, they saw the real thing, and they're like, this is nothing like what any media anywhere in the world, mainstream, was saying, let alone our governments. This is a beautiful thing. And the most deeply impactful thing for me, besides that, because I've never seen it in my life, 30 years almost, never seen that kind of a movement, and that says everything. To just, like, see that, and like, it's insane, because the emotional roller coaster you get, because it's just like, never ever seen that, which already is a statement in itself way more than enough to really make you wake up and realize, fuck, we're in a horribly, deadly, dangerous state as people around the world right now. If we do not stand the fuck up for our rights, our freedoms, everything, right? For everybody. Which is what they were doing, which is beautiful as one of the big impacts too. But it's just like, it's a beautiful thing because you can tell, you can literally, not only all the literal definition of unity, you want to look up a definition of unity in the dictionary, in any language, whatever unity is in your language, that should be the fucking pictures and video files you will see in those dictionaries. Because it's imperative. Because that is literally the definition. You cannot get more perfection definition of unity. And the vibration, the energy, the energetic vibration of everybody there. And everybody supporting. Whether you were on the side of the freeways and roads, you were already living or visiting Ottawa, or you were going to these different cities where you were having your own related rallies, you know, whatever it was, like, or you were the truckers themselves in the convoys. You could not help but feel overwhelming amounts of love and commitment and determination and passion, like, just literally genuine, authentic, pure, unified love. That's the number one energy with this fucking Freedom Convoy up in Canada. Supporters, the truckers, doesn't matter, that's what it was. You could see it, you could feel it, you could hear it, everything, through a fucking camera, thus through a fucking phone screen. Think about that. You're not even there. Imagine how overwhelming it would have been to actually have been there in person. Especially if you're somebody like me who feels emotions intensely. But it's just like, wow. It's incredible. And so, I'm so in love with that convoy, Freedom Convoy 2022, Canada. And I don't have almost any money. I still don't have an income at the moment. So, like, but yet, at the same time, I'm like, even if it's $30, $40, I feel like I need to fucking show my support for that to the extent that I want to buy We the Fringe merch and just wear that. Because, like, that would be such a happy thing for me to have on hand, even if I never wear it. But I would wear it. I would wear it very proudly. Be like, I would be happy to be part of that fringe. And I guess in a way I kind of was. Even if more spiritually, so to speak, like, at a distance. Because, of course, I don't have the money or the resources or even a vehicle. So there's no way I can fucking go up to Ottawa, let alone to Canada. I would love to. Can't, to participate in those things. And the best I could do here is, if it happens in Portland, then cool. If not, I'm screwed, And as far as I know, I'm screwed. Because the U.S. is going to have their own Freedom Convoy, too. It's going to start in LA, and it's going to go directly all the way across the nation, nonstop, until they hit DC, where then they will do the same thing as they did up in Canada. They will occupy DC, at least for a full 24-hour cycle, not longer, to demand the end to all mandates and passports and everything else. Good on them for that, because that's literally what dictatorships have always done. They implement passport systems, privilege-based merit systems. The meritocracy is based on discrimination and segregation. You don't fit insert demographic here and titles here, then you're considered a horrible bad person. You deserve to be fined and or jailed for it, and of course shunned and hated and discriminated against by society and rejected and even expulsed from it. That's how this shit works. Build-ups to dictatorships and dictatorships alike. This is the shit they do. So it's imperative to protect your own basic rights and freedoms around the world, by the way, by fighting against all mandates and passports of any and all kinds when it comes down to this kind of shit. Because, make no mistake, this is absolutely segregationist, and it's absolutely prejudiced, deeply prejudiced and discriminant. So it is imperative to fight against these things. Like, there's no fucking way to question that. You can, that's your prerogative and choice, but as far as I can see from any perspective and any logical look, or even non-logical look, emotional look, I cannot begin to get anywhere remotely close to figuring out how the heck somebody could defend against fighting against these things. It's just wild to me. But it is what it is. So now I'm actually going to conclude this. So thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you, especially sticking through this whole thing, because it's probably a lot longer than I thought, because even with editing, it looks like this will probably be maybe even around an hour and 20 minutes. I don't know how long it'll actually be. God help us all. But, hey, more power to it. I mean, this is actually kind of like a replacement for the podcast episode me and Sean were supposed to record tonight. Yeah. Oh, makes me realize, I'm going to mention this here, and then I'll record a quick little video just for that as well. I'm very excited and happy about this, because I finally have a basis in understanding and knowledge about when I and the rest of you all can expect to be able to engage with and hear the very first episode of our podcast, basically the premiere of it. It is going to be in 1 to 2.5 months from today, because basically behind the scenes stuff, and well, really, let's face it is business and stuff, has to be dealt with. And also, again, we both have our own lives. He has, admittedly, more of a life than I do right now, in the cliche sense. So, as a result, he's going to, basically it's waiting on him, but once he gets what he's getting done, then from that point on, we will officially now have episodes consistently, once a week, going live on every audio platform that you listen to your podcast on. Spotify, Apple Music, iTunes, you name it, it'll be there. And we, of course, just like Joe Rogan, the Joe Rogan Experience has the JR Clips channel, we will have our own very Clips channel. And it's not at all to like piggyback off of that concept. It's actually because to me and to him it's very logical and sensible, because of course in the long run it is the best way for you to kind of like dip the tips of your toes into the water and see if you like it or not, or if it's befit to you. and if you think that you would actually enjoy the listening to the episodes or not as well. But of course, it also is for highlights. So it's basically highlights big, like the more important topics in the highlighted moments of the podcast as well. So it's like the perfect entry point. And so if you actually end up subscribing on the whatever audio platform you use, that not only would I be endlessly thankful, and both of us would be, because it's going to help both of us a lot in the long run. But on top of that, of course, the podcast. But on top of that, my friends, here's the kicker. Here's the fun part. And because at that point, obviously, you enjoy it enough and you get enough value out of it. Likely, you're going to eventually want to introduce somebody else to it. And if you do, you can introduce them directly to the full podcasts, but that might be a little overwhelming, understandably. So, of course, the best way to do that, of course, is to refer them to the Clips channel on YouTube, Rumble, and or Odyssey. Obviously, some of the highlights and some of the main clips inevitably guaranteed are not going to be allowed on YouTube because they will strike the channel. So that's why I can safely say right now, it's a guarantee that we will have a Rumble and a Odyssey channel alongside of that. Or at least, I shouldn't say Odyssey, I should say a just exclusively a Rumble channel for now. Guaranteed on for the Clips channel. So definitely keep your eye out for that. But before any of that, since it is a month to 2.5 months out in the future, the important thing to remember is instead that this is the case, and therefore keep your eyes and ears peeled for updates on the podcast and official announcements for when it's officially gonna premiere. It's gonna be a lot of fun. I can't wait. But yeah, this is effectively like a replacement for the podcast episode we're going to record tonight. So in a way, it's kind of fitting. It's probably excessively long. But it just fit me. That's again why I called the other channel of mine Ramblin' Man Dan, because I do tend to ramble. So yeah, like I said in the beginning, make sure to subscribe to my/follow, whatever it is, branded on those websites. You get the picture. Go ahead and like or follow/subscribe on Rumble and or Odyssey. Again, the accounts are Danny Grog, Grogg. So Pirate's Favorite Drink with an extra G. See, one of the easiest things to find ever. That straightforward. And feel free to do that. If you want to see the compilation videos, that's exclusively going to ever be on Odyssey for the time being. And all political commentaries will likely, from here on out, I'm going to put them out also on those two platforms, not just here on YouTube. Just in case Google decides to get really fucking petty with me and decide, well, we just don't like him and what he talks about or shares. So we're going to police his account real closely and strike him every time now. Gotta be prepared for anything, right? Okay. Well, anyway, that said, stay safe out there. Have a great day night wherever you are. Stay free.